This one right here is about Demon D, right? The Incubus game. And I think I remember what really sparked up me wanting to really delve back into this topic, because I've touched on it in a few videos, was I was just scrolling through YouTube and I saw Ron Wills talking about the Demon Lover, right? And I wanted to listen to it for a while to make sure to see if we was talking about the same thing. And we were somewhat talking about the same thing, but I did want to just shout that out because that was something that inspired me to want to delve into this video, right? But the topic is the Demon D, the Incubus game. Now, what is that really, right? Now, first thing to understand is you got the succubus and you got the incubus, right? And I'm not talking about actual demons, I'm not talking about actually being an individual who's trying to hurt people and nothing like that. But what I am talking about is being able to tap into that hacking of the cycle of validation, right? Because there are abundance mindsets and then there are survival modes. And every man isn't going to start off his life having all of his experiences being positive experiences when it comes to dealing with women. I dare to say most men aren't, right? Just to be quote unquote select or to be chosen. And one thing that can change up your perspective on life and relationships and these different type of things is to be able to hack that system of understanding validation, the psychology, and to be able to tap into that empathy, right? Because really a lot of what the Incubus game is just dark empathy, right? You don't even have to be a real narcissist, because you need to have a certain level of empathy in order to feel where somebody's coming from, to feel someone's emotions when they're around you, and to be able to feel their emotions enough to feed off of that energy, right? Because there's a difference between being someone who's chasing after validation versus someone who can feel and feed off of energy, right? Because if you're a person who just chases after validation, it'll be very easy for an individual to simply just fake it, right? Let's say you're trying to run an Incubus game and you run across a woman who's going to just fake a bunch of orgasms. Then now your head's boosted up, you're taking validation out of it, and all she got to do is tell you she faked it, and now it's like, oh, all that shit just turned back over on itself, all the little confidence that you gained. But the truth is this: I believe confidence is a combination, right? It's a combination of how you internally feel about yourself and how your ego interprets what your experiences are versus what you think it should be, the ideal, and then also how you view and would like to view yourself, right? Anytime your circumstances or how you're being treated or your situation is very contrary to the way that you would like to view yourself, you're going to experience this feeling of self-betrayal. You're going to experience this feeling of being uncomfortable, this discomfort, right? That's natural. And really, that's the way it's supposed to be, right? You don't want to be somebody who experiences no negative emotion, no negative feelings when it comes to your outcomes and your situations, to the point where if you're not doing something that's actually competent or effective, you would never know, right? You wouldn't care, right? Now, for some men, that not giving a fuck thing works with their sex life. Is like, still beat though. But at the same time, I like to look at things from a perspective of when I engage with a woman, she knows that I know that she knows that she's getting more pleasure out of it than I am. Now, you don't want to just do that by simply not experiencing any pleasure at all, right? Because you have to understand there's the dominant ego, then there's the submissive ego, right? There's the dominant sexual ego, then there is the submissive sexual ego. Now, the dominant sexual ego is predicated upon being the primary giver of pleasure and the primary receiver of control. Now, what that means, being the primary giver of pleasure and the primary receiver of control, is that within your experiences, you're primarily taking the ego stroke of how far you can push a person with their actions, with their energy, with their desire level, with the intensity of their orgasms, with the intensity of their desire and the outward manifestation of that desire and arousal, right? Sometimes involuntarily bodily functions, right? Sometimes it's how far they allow you to stretch them, right? How far they allow you to stretch them. So you might talk to them and delve into their experiences that they've had in the past, and then pick certain things out that you would like to experience with them, and then knowing how to seduce and arouse them in a way to where they desire to do something that either they've never done or they've done and they didn't like, right? Or anytime, especially if it was something that anytime they did it, they felt like they were doing it for the person and not for themselves. If you know how to run Incubus game, then you can tap into their psychology, tap into the way that they're aroused, and then bring them to a place where they desire to do for you what they once felt like they desire to do the things with you, or to have you do things to them that they used to feel like they were doing for someone else. Like a great example of that is just like if you met a woman who's never truly tapped into the feminine submissive. She's never really tapped into enjoying sex for sex sake. It was always like a chore. It was always like an obligation. It was always transactional. And let's say she's always used her pussy as a bargaining chip in order to have financial, emotional, or social access to the men in her life that she's dealt with dating and relationships. Typically, with most women who have dealt like that, especially if it's a woman who hasn't cheated, now you can't expect somebody to tell you all their history, all their truth. But when you set a non-judgmental environment, it makes it much easier. Oftentimes when a woman feels like you're not a judgmental type of guy, she will be telling you shit you didn't even ask to know, right? You're just the easy to talk to individual because you have a lot of wisdom and insight, but also because she never feels like she's being judged when she's speaking to you, right? That inner freak that she has, you encourage it. You don't not only encourage it, but you entice it, you draw it out. You make it to where her personality when she's around you is a cum freak, right? And there are positives and negatives to it, right? And it's mostly positives. I'm gonna be honest with you. It is mostly positives, right? But one thing you have to understand about this is when you're running Incubus game, it's still only going to go a couple of ways, right? There's different ways it could go. One way that it can go is that if she's like very religious, right? Or if she's just on that female empowerment, know your worth type of shit. If she don't fully tap into the degradation kink, right? Then, especially if there's not a relationship on the table at that time, right? She's not at that point with you yet for a relationship to really be on the table. Then it's something called subspace, then sub drop, right? Subspace, then sub drop. It's just like when people would talk about doing ecstasy and how when they would do ecstasy, you know, the next day or a couple days later, I've never done ecstasy, but they would say they would have very bad emotions, right? Because they would go through such this high of all these dopamines, all of these receptors in their mind being fired off. But it's not that the drug gave that individual the hormones and all those different things, right? They still have the same neurochemical shit going on in their head. It's like they still got the same thing. They still got dopamine receptors. They still have oxytocin. They still have all these things. You have a limited amount of it that your body can experience. And what the drugs do is they tap into that. They know how to tap into the receptors to release the amount that is already there, right? Understand what I'm saying? So it's not that they're giving it to you, because then when you get off of it, you'll be right back at your regular space. Sometimes it fires it off so much that, you know, you have a drop afterwards. And sometimes that can happen when you're running Incubus game. And that's one of the importances of aftercare, right? When it comes, especially on some BDSM type of stuff. That's one of the importances of aftercare. But when you're running the demon game, or the Demon D, that Incubus game, is kind of like this cross between BDSM and casual sex. And the thing about casual sex is, when it comes to aftercare, oftentimes that becomes inadvertent behavior that emotionally attaches a person to you, and also, or may scare a person off. If their goal is to engage in casual sex without their emotions being involved, then going through things like aftercare, spending the night with a woman, talking to her for long times on the phone, taking a shower with her, cuddling up with her all night, maybe things that give inadvertent behavior that cause the woman to become attached. And then if her emotions get involved outside of just sex, then sometimes it's a positive to where she'll want to start pursuing, to express how much she wants you around, to be there around you. But sometimes it becomes a love bomb. It depends on how much is in her cup. If she's in a low cup already, then the amount of energy that gets poured out being in a feminine submissive space is going to run her the fuck dry, right? That's why I say insecure women cannot be feminine and submissive, because they don't have enough in their cup to do it, right? That's why sometimes dudes don't understand why a woman may pick a Pookie or a Ray Ray, whatever they call it, right, to sleep with. Sometimes it's just a matter of, it may be a man who she has no fear in her mind of truly becoming emotionally invested in, or truly wanting to build anything with. So when she goes and has sex with this man who is already disqualified from something serious in her own mind, it makes it a lot easier for her to separate sex from emotions, so that she can still experience this submissive ego, right? To tap into that submissive ego that's within her shadow. So she can still tap into it, but she can do it for either flings, short periods of time, a one night stand here and there. Some women may have one just once a year, right? Some women may have them every weekend, right? Some may have them every few days. But it's one of those things where sometimes a woman may, if she doesn't have a man in her life who's her dom, if she doesn't have a man in her life who she desires sexually, then oftentimes a woman will need that novelty factor so that she can tap into that zone and leave out of it. Because a lot of women they have a really love-hate relationship with their own nature of femininity. So while they love being a woman, there's still times where tapping into that feminine submissive nature of getting wrapped up being around a man's finger, right, is one of those things to where she enjoys it in the moment, but afterwards she may feel like she needs to know her worth and value herself and respect herself more. So it kind of creates this love-hate relationship. So she kind of just wants to be able to tap into that feminine submissive a little bit in sex with a dude who she's not connected to emotionally. That way she can get that off of her shadow, regulate herself a little bit, and then still continue to carry on with her social image, her social appearance of being a more masculine woman or being a more dominant woman, right? Because how I define the submissive sexual ego is to be an individual who is the primary receiver of pleasure and the primary giver of control. Now, one thing to understand is that the more control you give up, the more pleasure you open yourself up to. Typically, a masculine individual will experience less pleasure, and a dominant individual will experience less pleasure. Because a masculine person wants to control the flow of things too much for them to be open to experiences outside of what they've already imagined for themselves. So sometimes that masculinity can dim the picture when it comes to being submissive, right? But it can also concentrate the picture when it comes to being dominant, right? Dominant. So a submissive individual who's in their feminine submissiveness, they're flexible and fluid about the way that they're being dominated. And when they think about the different sides in themselves that they don't always get to see that come out when they're dealing with someone who's just pushing them and pushing them and pushing them, giving them more orgasms than they've ever had, giving them orgasms that they've never had at all, getting them to do things that they never thought they would do, A person can become addicted to that version of who they are in the presence of that individual. And that's the thing about the Incubus game, right? Now, one thing to understand about the Incubus game is that you run that shit for too long, right? You might start losing some of your ability to orgasm during sex. Real shit. You don't want to take that shit too far. You do not want to take it too far. You can take it too far, but that's a sign that you need to chill out a little bit, right? Like if you can't come during sex anymore and you're not a super monkey grip on the dick, nigga, when you beating your shit, then you might need to chill out a little bit, because that shit can go far. That shit can go far. I think that there's some men who run the Incubus game who are not truly homosexuals, but they end up becoming very sexually indiscriminate, because you start chasing after the thrill or the high of pushing the limit. And then if you let taboos and things that are like social mores, you let certain things that you just want to rebel against society, you rebel against it enough, then, and you're just chasing after pleasure, eventually you're going to become indiscriminate, right? Which means that you might start sleeping with more and more women that you didn't consider attractive just because you want some pleasure. And before you know it, shit, if your roster get too low, your cup may get low and you might make some bad decisions. And I'm not judging nobody. If that's your inclination, then I respect your orientation. But there's some men out there that's not their orientation. They just took shit too far. And like, that's kind of like, let's say it's a man in prison. He can't control his urge to dominate somebody, so he gets off on turning out other men. A lot of times that might be a man who will never deal with a man if he's in the world out free. Just a nigga can't control himself. And a lot of times those are people who need to be locked up anyways. Real shit. But when we're talking about the Incubus game, a lot of it comes in the fact that when you're in that dominant sexual ego, you're primarily deriving pleasure from the ego gratification of how in control you are, how dominant you are, how much pleasure you're giving, how far you take them, and then also the other outward manifestations of their desire and arousal level. One of those things could be them spending money, right? Like as a man, like when you macking and shit like that, you the way you talk to a woman, the way you interact with her, she's willing and open to whatever way you want to dominate her. Eventually it's gonna tap into her pockets too. You get that woman really, really aroused, really, really turned on, she getting that feminine submissive around you, she just gonna start spending money on you. Real shit, when you're running an Incubus game, right? I mean, that's something that happens. Another thing is, and you got to watch out for this, she may not give any fucks about her boyfriend or her husband, right? You come across a woman and you've given her that feeling and she has a new man in her life, you always got a key to the pussy unless that man can take her further than you can. That's just the truth, right? That's why I always say it's not about the body count, right? I don't say that a woman's past doesn't matter at all. I say make sure your sex game, your game, how you carry yourself as a man is competitive across the board, because you can't guarantee a woman's really going to tell you 100% of the truth. She might be not counting things like maybe rape, being sexually assaulted. And you know what? She might have been a woman who had her first orgasm when she was being assaulted. You know, because it tapped into that submissive sexual ego without her permission, right? It's like, let's say, certain things are biological. Like a man being dominant, hitting on those spots for a woman, that shit becomes, this shit is biological. It's just written into the body. Like the body, I don't think the body has too much of a concept of the idea of consent like that. It's like you're either aroused or you're not. Either you're turned on, you're not. Either it's hitting the spots or it's not. And I know this sounds fucked up to say. I am in no way condoning sexual assault. Not at all. But we got to be honest. There are a lot of women who have their first orgasm while they're being assaulted. And there's reasons that happens, right? There's that dominant, there's that submissive sexual ego that's in the shadow of a lot of women and men. It's in men's shadow too, but it's a little bit more pronounced in a lot of women, where it's this submissive sexual ego that's just sitting right there, waiting for somebody who either knows how to talk to her in a way to draw it out, someone who knows how to just seduce her, right? Someone, but then there's also those very gray area periods where a lot of interactions may not be very verbal, right? Now, I like to make sure I'm verbal and things are vocalized about certain shit I want to do, right? But at the same time, I understand that in real life, there's going to be a lot of instances where two people may never fully have a conversation about it. They may be out on the dance floor, they're dancing, they touching on each other, and then just somebody grabs something. They grab by the arm, whatever it is, they keep it pushing, and they take it right to the bathroom and they get it in. No true conversation behind it, right? You know, when people are very, very aroused, people forget about the conversation of consent. That includes women, right? There's a lot of women out there who will just straight up take the dick, right? They're not gonna ask, right? They get horny enough, they gonna try to get it, and if you're not trying to do it, what they gonna do? Coerce you, right? Try to nag you, right? Or they'll get mad, or they'll start begging, they'll try to pay, right? And these are the type of things that you experience when you run an Incubus game, right? Because you're gonna start off, sometimes it might start off, I learned to stop doing this, but kind of starts off with a sexual love bomb, a sex bomb, right? Where you just jump right off the handle. You learn that woman's body relatively quickly, but you just already have certain skills. A lot of it comes with the sexual skills that you just have, that you learned over time, like just knowing a woman's spots, knowing her erogenous zones, knowing her hot spots, places to kiss her, places to touch her, being able to just pick up little things in her psychology, right? Saying things that are unexpected. Like, I've been able to run Incubus game before just over text message, right? Or over just Facebook Messenger or some shit like that. And not even really having to get on the phone and talk to the woman, but just texting the woman in a way to where she's so intrigued, she's so curious, she's so aroused that the moment I'm in her presence, she's already feeling that energy. You just hang back, be cool about things, right? Just hang back, be cool. But when you speaking very matter-of-factly, speaking very sternly, and that's a personality trait. But being able to, and you can feel that shit. You can feel it going right into your chest here. It's like not butterflies, but it kind of feels like, I don't know how to explain it. This is a little feeling you get right here in your chest, right? Where that woman is in that very feminine, submissive energy. She's in that headspace where she's tapping into her submissive sexual ego and her shadow, right? And you know that in this moment, her mind is like putty in my hands. What she's gonna do for me right now is whatever the fuck I say. Not by force, not by lying, nah, because I said so. And whatever it is that I want to do, she's already accepted in her mind and in her body. Her body is accepted that what I want to do is going to feel better than what she wants to do, right? So she just gives herself over to me, right? This is just some stuff to understand. I think a lot of guys, they don't quite get this, and they wonder why certain men don't have to spend money to deal with women, right? They just don't get it. They're like, no, if she's attractive, you gotta pay in some way. You gonna pay for something. Nah, bro. Let's not run with that narrative. It's not true. You might have to, because you want the woman more than you want to do things your way. You might want to, because your desire level is so high for this woman that you feel it's inconceivable that she'll desire you more than you desire her. Right? So you submit yourself to doing things that her way, right? You submit yourself to saying, okay, I gotta invest something to get at her. Man, you can talk to a woman in a way to where she knows that what she's getting out of dealing with you is dick. Strong, hard, long dick. And a little bit of conversation. And just having access to pleasure that she can't just find just anywhere. And dealing with the man who understands her validation, right? Because there's high quality and then there's high quantity validation, right? You know, the things that you validate a woman for it's kind of on a hierarchy, right? If a woman's interested in you at all, on some level, it means that there's validation that she wants to get from you. Now, it's just a matter of what is she willing to do to get that validation, right? If all she has to do is show up and allow you to take care of her financially and to shower her with affection and attention and money and all this other shit and social validation just because she's attractive? What? You dead ass serious? Ain't no way, boy. Ain't no way. She don't respect you. Which means that what you do, what you think, has very little influence over her emotions. Very little influence over her desire. Very little. It's not always going to be that way. There's going to be a dude who she's attracted enough to anyways, or that's just his thing. That's just how he moves. Whether the woman wanted to do it like that or not, that's what he is going to do. Now, that's a nigga on a whole nother level. That's not what I'm talking about right now, right? Now, with the Incubus game, it works in a lot of different ways. One side of it can be just, let's say nigga had a long week at work and pours into your cup. Now, you're pretty much trading her pleasure in exchange for ego gratification or validation. You know what? I don't want to play with the words, right? I don't want to play around with it too much because there's a lot of dudes who speak about it like only women desire validation. But if you like to satisfy a woman sexually, right, that's a form of validation. Her being satisfied. Her giving you control. That's a form of validation, right? Because you're not taking control. She's giving it to you. You might be seducing her to give it to you. You might be running game, right, for her to give it to you. That's still a choice, or you're taking it. That's slavery, man. That's kidnapping. You don't just take control unless that's a woman who says that little bit of aggression that you show turns her on. Now, that's a whole nother thing right there, too. When your aggression, it turns a woman on, you don't want to play with that too much sometimes when it comes to like those real toxic ass relationships. But at the same time, a woman being receptive to your dominance, that's the shit right there. When she's receptive to that dominant energy that you have as a man. But the Incubus game, it runs pretty strong, right? Like that Incubus game can take you in a matter of a couple years, right? And really, you can run Incubus game for like a year, 6 months, right? If you do it correctly, then it can take your confidence level from being very theoretical or based on non-sexual things. It's like you may be confident that you're a good person, right? You may be confident that you got your shit together. You may be confident that you can even be confident that you're attractive. But if you don't have the experience, that confidence isn't really connected to your sexual confidence, right? And sexual confidence is a whole other beast when it comes to dealing with women, right? That sexual confidence is different from just your overall confidence as a person. Because I know guys who have confidence in life don't have sexual confidence, right? That's that big dick energy. You just walk around like King Dingaling. And walking around like King Dingaling is a good ass feeling, right? Yeah, that's what it is. You just deal with women who are receptive to that, who are receptive to you, who don't see it as a joke. See, that's the thing about it, right? when you run Incubus game, all that shit that you hear niggas talk about how they deal with women that you think is bullshit, all of it comes true. Right? Like, just walk around, call her your bitch. She loves it. It gets her wet. It gets her turned on. She says something a little bit slick. You're like, who the fuck you talking to? And she's not scared or nothing like that. It's not that she's afraid. It's that your dominance triggers in her mind things that were anchored in during sex. So when you fucking her and she's coming on you, say, you know, say you my nasty bitch, right? Right as she about to come, you know, that gets implanted into her mind, right? It gets anchored in. As that gets anchored in, then some things that you may say that may appear aggressive or abusive to the outside world are merely things that were anchored in during sex that trigger arousal, trigger that submissive desire that permeates outside of the bedroom, right? Because just because a woman's sexually submissive to you doesn't mean she's submissive to you, right? But when a woman is highly sexually submissive to you and her attraction to you goes outside of the bedroom as well, then that submissiveness in the bedroom can start to permeate outside of the bedroom as long as she is in an aroused state of mind. So if you know how to get a woman very aroused and attracted to just you on a sexual level and to you as a man, to where just the way that you walk, the way you talk, the way you carry yourself, it keeps her pussy wet. She just gets turned on. Every time she's thinking about you, every time she's looking at you, she's hot and bothered, right? You're talking to her and you just give her a little smirk, you know what I mean? Or you shoot some sexual innuendo out there and act like you didn't do it, right? And she just wants to pick up on it. She wants to bite on it because you catching her hand in the cookie jar all the time. And you don't even have to do anything about it every time you catch her hand in the cookie jar. See, that's part of how you go through that process of really teasing and doing pleasure denial. It's like you know how to trigger arousal, right? Because some people think edging is just sticking on the shit for a long time. No, if that person is not close to having an orgasm or at least highly, highly aroused, that's not edging. You just going slow. You get what I'm saying? That's just orbiting, right? That's just indirect stimulation. You know, when you're really doing edging, when you're really doing pleasure denial, what you got to understand is you have to know how to trigger sexual arousal. And not only do you have to know how to trigger sexual arousal, but then after triggering that sexual arousal, you have to have the ability to maintain and hold it there, right? And that's part of that teasing. Not when talking about edging, I was talking about teasing, right? Edging is where you get her close to the orgasm and then you slow it down, or you just stop, you just press it in, you hold it in there, you're eating her out, then you start orbiting, you start giving her indirect stimulation, you start just doing it very slow or very lightly. And then from that place, you've done your thing, right? From that place, you are now good, right? So with this understanding being in mind, when it comes to teasing, then when it comes to edging, these things are about building up anticipation. And the more the anticipation and the arousal builds up, the higher her arousal level gets. And the higher her arousal level gets, the more energy she's pouring out as far as desire, right? The more energy she's pouring out as far as desire. After she's poured out a certain level of energy, you got to know how to chill out. It's kind of like being a vampire. You can't drink the last drop. You can't drink dead blood. You got to, but you always push her a little bit further than last time, right? And then sometimes you don't push her at all. You let the pleasure denial intensity build up. Sometimes you're pushing with pleasure. Sometimes you're pushing through how far you can take her, how many orgasms you can give her, how intense you can make them, putting her in an uncomfortable position when she's aroused enough because it's going to hit that spot better, taking her out somewhere in public, taking her somewhere where people might be able to see, you know what I mean? Maybe taking her by a dumpster, you know what I mean? Do some wild shit, Don't do anything that's illegal and say that I told you to do it, though, right? There's also just matters of the way you get it in, right? Sometimes it might be very aggressive, right? It might be a choke here, a slap here, pulling her hair, putting a thumb in her bum, right? All these different things are things that stretch her. And the pleasure of being in the feminine submissive is that you desire to be dominated. When you're in the feminine submissive, that domination is something that increases your arousal level, because the confidence in the submissiveness is what it can take, right? What it can take that's being dished out. What it can do from an intrinsic desire place, right? A feminine submissive woman is internally a little arrogant and proud about how much she enjoys sucking the dick for her own pleasure. That's just real, right? A feminine submissive woman is going to be proud of herself with how well she can take the D. You know, she might be, you know, it's a little bit difficult for her, but also just being pushed, having a man who can push her limits, that's like a godsend for a woman who wants to tap into that feminine submissive energy. But what you're doing is you're giving her pleasure in exchange for power. You're giving her pleasure in exchange for having power over certain things, over her emotions, right? Now that comes with trust, right? But trust is a little bit different. That one type of trust is you build rapport over time. Another type of trust is to take someone somewhere they weren't expecting to go when they liked it when they got there. Now they automatically have a certain level of trust for you because they know that things are going to be more fun when you're in control than when they're in control, right? Very powerful concept to think about. Very powerful concept. So this is just Coach Brody on the Incubus game. I'm out.